Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing the final part of the Summer-Ween series. This is going to be part 10 of the Summer-Ween Halloween DIYs. But don't worry and stay tuned because the next few weeks we're going to be doing a few more DIYs as I show you how I decorate with everything I've made. We're going to start out today with this project, which is a hanging clock that I found at the thrift store, and I wanted to turn this into a little frame to put my beautiful little witch photo in. This is a photo from my Etsy shop. You can find the link in the description box below. I started by just taking apart the little clock mechanism, just removing the hands and the actual battery pack. Then I used that battery pack to trace around the photo so I could cut that out to fit inside of it. Once I have this cut out, I will just use a glue stick to apply it to the clock mechanism and then set this aside for later. I wanted to add a little bit of fall detail to the frame part of this clock, so I'm using some of these fall leaf molds that I got from Amazon and a little bit of my air dry clay. Now, I've had a few of you ask me how I get my molds out without them falling apart or tearing. And this is exactly how I did it. I slowed this down for you guys so you can see, but I always use the mold to get them out. I bend it and then just kind of pop it out without actually pulling on the clay. Once I had a few of those random pieces made in the molds, then I just decided to start placing these. I really didn't have a picture in my head of what it was going to look like, but I did make a few and then just kind of went with it. Once I had all of them glued down, then I let this dry for about 24 hours until the clay had hardened, and then I'm going to go over all of these pieces with 2 coats of some black chalk paint. To finish it off, I used a small brush and some European gold rub and buff, went over all the fall leaves, and then went over each of the other pieces with just what was left over on the brush. Then I just popped the picture inside and put it all back together. I found this shadow box that had some shelves on it from the thrift store, and the cool thing about this one is it actually did have a lock on the side of it and came with the set of keys for it. So I thought this would make a perfect mini little apothecary box or cabinet of curiosities. The first thing I had to do was take off all of that hardware so that I wouldn't get paint on it. So I just set that aside for later, and then I had to tape off the glass on the front frame because the glass actually doesn't come out of here. So I just used some painter's tape, tape that up, and then I'm going to give everything a couple coats of some black chalk paint. On the inside of the actual box piece, I used a small paintbrush, and I was just very careful to not get it on the back part, but you could tape that up as well. Once everything was dry, then it was time to decorate all my little shelves. I ended up only putting 2 of the shelves back in here because I wanted more space in between them, but everything I am going to put in here is from Dollar Tree. I have some little skeleton bones, a small skeleton, and some little glass bottles. I wanted to make those bones and everything else look really old and creepy, so I just used some antiquing wax, painted it on, and then used a paper towel to kind of brush it off. I also ended up cutting that skeleton into pieces, his torso, legs, and arms, then just doing the same thing and using some antiquing wax. For all the little glass jars that I had, I used a little bit of Mod Podge and mixed it with some used coffee grounds, then just painted that mixture all over all of the bottles. Then it was time to arrange everything inside of my little cabinet. I decided to add some of this Spanish and green moss mixture into a few of the bottles. In some of the other ones, I'm going to add in a few dried flowers just to make it look like there were some little potions or ingredients in these bottles. And I just used a skinny little wood dowel to help me get get this stuff down into those tiny little bottles. As I was arranging things in this box, I kind of just went with it. I didn't have an idea really of how it was going to look in the end. I just started hot gluing everything down into the box just so it wouldn't be moving around, and then just kind of figuring out where everything goes. To fill in a lot of the empty spots and also make this look even creepier, I'm adding in a little more of that Spanish moss and green moss mixture. For this project, we're going to be making an apothecary sign. I found this wood piece at my local thrift store, and it was already a Halloween sign, but I just removed everything off of it and gave it a light sanding. To turn this into an apothecary sign, I made this in Canva and printed it off on a piece of rice paper. And I do have this image available for free download on my blog. I used my watercolor pen from Dollar Tree and went all around this image. Then I'm going to tear off all of these little edges and just make them jagged and not perfect. And I set that aside to use for later, but first I wanted to paint this sign. I'm using some Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster, and I'm going to do 2 coats over this. For my graphic, I'm going to be doing the iron-on method, so I needed to do 1 little coat of some Mod Podge over this and let that completely dry. Once it was dry, I just centered my graphic and then put a piece of parchment paper over top of it, used my little iron, and ironed over this for about a minute or 2. To fill in the empty space around the graphic and also cover up the edges of the paper, I'm using some spackling and this spiderweb stencil that I got from Amazon, and I'm going to go around and do a raised texture all around this, just letting it touch the edge of the paper. When I had finished, I set that aside and let the spackling completely dry and harden before painting it with another coat of that Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster. And to finish it off, I'm going to go over this with some European Gold Rub and Buff with a big fluffy brush, and I'm even going to go over the actual graphic. We're going to be making some Halloween books for this next project. All you'll need is either some Dollar Tree books or thrift store books. And to make my covers, I actually purchased these transparent graphics off of Etsy. These are book covers that come with the front, back, and different spines that you can mix and match. I'm going to leave the link for these in the description box below, but you can print these off on any type of paper. I actually had this old kind of worn paper that I bought from Amazon, and I'm going to start out by applying the spines first. This is kind of a thicker paper, so I'm using some Mod Podge to apply the spine. Don't worry about cutting anything down yet. And as you can see here, I left a little bit of extra paper beside the actual spine pieces so I could wrap those around the front and the back of the book. Once I have both sides and the actual spine done of this, I will go over it with a light layer of Mod Podge just to make sure it has a nice seal at the edges. Then I will set this aside and let that part completely dry before moving on to this step, which is adding the front cover. Again, once I have this laid down with some Mod Podge, then I'll let this completely dry before moving on to the back side. Once all my sides are dry, then I can start wrapping the paper to the inside of the book, and I'm going to do this kind of like wrapping a present. Just making sure those corners are kind of folded upward at an angle, and then Mod Podging this to the inside of the book at all sides. If you're using a thicker paper like I am, you may need to add a little bit of Mod Podge to the actual paper. Continue working around all sides, but don't worry about the spine pieces just yet. Once I have the sides done, then I am again going to let all of these sides completely dry before moving to the spine. With the excess paper that is on the spines, I'm just going to open my book completely and pull out the pages. You'll be able to tuck those spine pieces down inside of the book. I found this old wood plaque at the thrift store and it did have a paper image on it. I just scraped that off and then cleaned this up and gave it a light sanding. And then I'm just going to leave this exactly as it is. I liked the color, I liked the aging on it, but then I wanted to add a haunted house stencil on top of here. This is actually one of those screen stencils, but I have no idea where I actually got this, but I did find one almost exactly like it on Amazon that I'll have linked in my storefront. Like I said, this is one of those stencils that is like a screen stencil that you're supposed to use with the paste, but I am just going to use this with some black acrylic paint. This one is also self-adhesive, so I just kind of made it off center a little bit. I wanted it hanging over more to one side. Then I'm just going to use a sponge brush, load it up with some acrylic paint, and then dab off a lot of the excess and go over this twice. Once it had fully dried, I went over it with some fine grit sandpaper just to make this blend in more with that old wood piece, make this look old and vintage. Then I cleaned it up and sealed it with some Aleene's acrylic sealer. You may remember a few videos back, I did a plaster Grim Reaper. In this video, we're going to be doing some Plaster Ghost. I'm making 2 of these, so I filled up 2 water bottles with some water just so they'll be nice and sturdy when I put the plaster over top of this. And to make their heads nice and round, I'm using some Dollar Tree foam balls and I'm going to hot glue those to the tops of the water bottles. To keep the plaster from sticking to those foam balls, I'm going to cover them with a little bit of clear plastic wrap and then secure that with a couple rubber bands. To make these ghosts, you can use any kind of fabric you want to use. I'm just using some flour sacks that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I just placed these over my water bottles and started cutting them very randomly at the bottom. Just make sure that you leave a little bit of excess there at the bottom. Then, just like I did with my Grim Reaper, I mixed up a little bit of plaster of Paris with some water, but for these ghosts I did make this just a little bit more watery than it called for. I sprayed each of my bottles with a little bit of water, and this is going to help make sure that the plaster doesn't stick to it. Make sure you cover your space because this is going to get a little bit messy and you definitely want to wear some gloves. But then all you have to do is dip whatever fabric you're using down into that plaster mixture. Make sure it is very saturated, wring out the excess, and then you can put it over top of your water bottles. Once I had mine draped, then I had a little bit of time to work with this before it starts to harden. So I just went around and made sure the fabric was exactly like I wanted it. I made some folds in the front and the sides and the back so that it really looked like a ghost. And then the most important part is making sure that that bottom portion of your fabric is kind of spread out a little bit to help this stand once it's dry. And there's really a ton of options with these ghosts when you're making them. You could add arms, make them hold something, whatever you'd like to do. I just let mine dry overnight for about 24 hours and then I just kind of wiggled the water bottle and it popped right out. Now for mine, I decided I wasn't going to paint them or anything because I actually really loved this kind of grungy off-white color that they turned out to be. But you could paint yours if you wanted to. That's totally up to you. I also could not decide whether I wanted to add eyes and a mouth to them or just leave them. So I ended up leaving them like this for now, but let me know in the comments below if I should give them eyes and a mouth.